Shalom, I'm Avi Melamed. I would like to thank the Begin Center staff and everyone who attended last week's event where we screened 3 episodes of our docuseries, The Seamline. For those who couldn't join us or want to experience it again, the full recording of the event is available following this message. If you are interested in exploring more, you can watch the full series for free on IZZY-Stream Israel. Just follow the link below. To deepen your understanding of Israel, Jerusalem, and the Middle East, consider reading my latest book, Inside the Middle East, Entering a New Era. A link to a purchase of the book is also below. And if you would like to follow my analysis and stay informed about upcoming events, virtual events, webinars, and more, I invite you to join my mailing list. Please sign up using the link which is also below. Thank you for your support and interest in these critical discussions.
Erev Tov. Good evening, everybody. My name is Paul Gross. I'm a senior fellow here at the Begin Center. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this event. I can see a number of familiar faces, people who attend our events regularly, both here in person at the center and also on Zoom, where we have regular programming for English speakers. Those of you who are familiar with our programming will know that since October 7th, we've been doing a lot of events, lectures, discussions around that topic. This event is not specifically to do with that and was planned sometime before that, but inevitably, because it's about relations between Arabs and Jews, there are obviously relevant topics that will come up, and we can explore those in conversation later. But essentially, I wanted to firstly, after welcoming you all, thank Avi Melamed and Maya Hoffman very much for their cooperation, their collaboration, their partnership with the Begin Center in producing this event. It's a really, I think, important piece of work, series, educational and informational, and as we'll hear, that's really what Avi Melamed is spending his time on at the moment. I think it's never more important than now. So before I introduce our speaker, I'll just briefly tell you how this evening is going to run. After some words of introduction from Avi, we're going to watch not the entire series. We're going to watch 3 of the 5 episodes spliced together in a running sort of runtime of just over an hour. I'm going to have a conversation with Avi, ask him a few questions, and then open up to your questions from the floor. Get those questions formulating in your heads as you're watching the documentary. There'll be an opportunity to ask those questions. So let me introduce Avi Melamed, a geopolitical Middle East expert, intelligence analyst, founder and CEO of Inside the Middle East Intelligence Perspectives, ITME. He has a history as a former Israeli intelligence official and a senior advisor on Arab affairs. He's been uniquely situated at the intersection of diplomacy, education, and intelligence. Beyond his intelligence roles, where he undertook high-risk counterterrorism assignments, Avi's most significant contribution lies in his commitment to education. Through ITME, which is an apolitical, non-partisan institution, he's pioneered an innovative approach to understanding the Middle East. Its core objective is to nurture critical thinking about the region's past, present, and potential futures, fostering nuanced, comprehensive perspectives. He's the author of 3 books on the region, including his latest, Inside the Middle East, Entering a New Era, and he is also, of course, the creator of this newly released documentary series, The Seamline, which explores the conflict in Jerusalem and over Jerusalem. As I said, we're going to be watching a specially created for this event, putting together of 3 of the 5 episodes of the series. If you want to watch the other 2, it's available online for free. We can send you all the link to that website afterwards. If you don't get an email from us, you can email me, paulg@begincenter.org.il. You can also go to the website of ITME. Okay, I'm going to invite Avi Melamed to the podium, and we'll go from there.
Ladies and gentlemen, shalom, good evening. Shalom lekulam. Thank you for joining us tonight. It is heartwarming to see so many people of all different ages and backgrounds come together to learn, explore, and understand more about Jerusalem. My name is Avi Melamed, and I am the founder of Inside the Middle East, or in short, ITME, a nonprofit institute dedicated to providing apolitical, contextualized education and knowledge about our region. I have dedicated my life to understanding and educating about our region and how events in the neighborhood impact Israel. The Seamline is a 5-episode documentary about the struggle over and in Jerusalem. This series is part of a continuum of educational products we offer, which are preliminary focused on educating global Jewry about Israel in the context of the Middle East. The series aims to showcase various aspects of Jerusalem, offering viewers unique and sometimes unfamiliar perspectives on the city. The series provides a satellite perspective as well as an intimate view from inside the alleys and neighborhoods. The series explores Jerusalem from both a geopolitical and geostrategic context and through the personal experiences of the people living in the city. Tonight, we will screen 3 chapters, 3 episodes, consecutive episodes. I selected these 3 because they are good representation of the overall theme of the series. The opening episode provides the database to understand the rest of the episodes. The second, titled Tolerance and Fanaticism, addresses the many layers of the issue of the Temple Mount compound. The third, titled Fences and Bridges, explores the challenge of coexistence in Jerusalem. I'm very honored that Tali Levit, where are you? Tali, please stand up. And I'm saying this word, and Tami Lavi, where is Tami? Tami? Both of whom are in the third episode that will be screened this evening here tonight. I feel fortunate to have the privilege of creating the series for 3 reasons. First, I have the honor of joining a small club of people who get to see their work documented in their lifetime. Second, as a 4th-generation Jerusalemite with deep family roots in the city, and having grown up in an environment where both Hebrew and Arabic were integral to daily life, I see the series as closing of a personal circle. Finally, I'm fortunate for the opportunity this series gives me to share insights and experiences that may contribute positively to resolving conflicts wherever they may be. I want to honor the memory of 2 dear individuals, Amir Cheshin and Jamil Siaj, who are no longer with us. As mentors and friends, their lives and endeavors are an integral part of Jerusalem's history. The production of this series was made possible thanks to the generous support and visionary leadership of generous donors and supporters of Inside the Middle East Abroad. And I'm grateful for them. Please join me in expressing appreciation and personally thank to a few people. Our board and funders represented this evening by our president, Mr. Eli Ovitz. Eli? Ayelet Efrati, the producer of the series, and the entire professional and dedicated production team. Mr. Didier Boudin, our jack of all trades. This is the guy that runs all the night with this camera. and or as we call him, the person who makes us look good. Special thank you for a very dear friend of mine, Mr. Walid Abu Zaid. Walid, where are you? Stand up. Walid is the man for every mission you have in mind. I also want to thank Paul Gross and the Begin Center staff for their cooperation. Ashira as well, where are you? Please raise your hand, I want to see you. And of course, a huge thank you to my partner in life and educational mission, Maya Hoffman. Maya is a role model for me in her professional and personal commitment, as well as her uncompromising striving for excellence. There was a wonderful series, British series called Rample. You probably are familiar with that series. And the lawyer used to call his wife, she who must be obeyed. Yeah. I dedicate this series in the loving memory of my parents, Yardena and Yosef Melamed, third generation Jerusalemites. I dedicate it in honor of the Melamed, Ben Menashe, Basher families who are deeply rooted in Jerusalem, and in honor of my children, Sapir and Nimrod Melamed, fifth generation Jerusalemites. Enjoy the show, and I look forward to our discussion afterwards. Thank you very much. From 1948 to 1967, Jerusalem was physically divided. The barrier dividing the city into east and west was known as the seam line. That line does not exist anymore. However, in this series, we will learn that Jerusalem has many seam lines. Some are visible, others are invisible. My name is Avi Melamed. I'm an Israeli Jew. I was born and raised in Jerusalem. At the age of 29, in my role as the deputy and then advisor on Arab affairs to two mayors of Jerusalem, I found myself at the forefront during one of the most complex and violent chapters in the history of Jerusalem, the Intifada. My mission was to restore trust between the Arab residents of Jerusalem and the authorities. It was a unique opportunity to act in a mission of hope in times of despair in a city that is proud of me and I am part of. But before we set out on our journey, it is important that we know some basic milestones and terms. Jerusalem sits on a mountain range on the western edge of the Judean desert. It also sits on the east-west axis, connecting Israel's eastern border, the Jordan Valley, with Israel's western border, the Mediterranean Sea.
I want to remind you firstly there are goodie bags outside, please make sure you take them.
The State of Israel was established on May 14, 1948. Refusing to recognize Israel the next day, 7 Arab countries launched a war against the newly born state. In Israeli Zionist terminology, the war is called the War of Independence. In Arab terminology, it is called Nakba, a word that means being afflicted with a serious disease. During the war, Jordan occupied and annexed the west bank of the Jordan River. The ceasefire line between the West Bank and the State of Israel was called the Green Line. The Green Line, also known as the Seam Line, physically divided Jerusalem into two parts. The part of Jerusalem west of the Green Line was governed and ruled by Israel. The part of Jerusalem east of the Green Line, including The old city of Jerusalem was governed and ruled by Jordan. I was born in a divided Jerusalem, Israel on one side and Jordan on the other. When I was in the first grade, we were told that war was imminent. At 6 years old, we were recruited to fill sandbags and put them on the window sills. The sandbags were to protect us from the unrelenting sniper fire coming from the Jordanian side of the city. Indeed, in June 1967, another war broke out between Israel and the Arab countries. I remember sitting with my cousin on a hill where the Knesset was. For the first time in our lives, we saw jets. The jets were bombing Jerusalem. At the end of the war, Jerusalem and the world woke up to a new reality. Following the 1967 war, Israel occupied the West Bank. The two parts of Jerusalem were now both under Israeli sovereignty, and this included the old city of Jerusalem. For Jews in Israel and around the world, this was a euphoric culmination of a 2,000-year-old dream. In the Arab terminology, the 1967 war is called Naksa, meaning a repeating severe illness. Since then, the municipal area of Jerusalem has primarily expanded in 3 directions. We're standing at the House Promenade in the southern part of Jerusalem. Looking north, we can see the old city of Jerusalem. The mountain you see to the right of the old city is the Mount of Olives, as well as the ancient Jewish cemetery. The old city of Jerusalem and the Mount of Olives is an area known as the Holy Basin. Looking south from the House Promenade, we can see a mixture of neighborhoods predominantly populated by Jews and neighborhoods that are predominantly populated by Arabs. The Arabs who live in Jerusalem are also referred to as Jerusalemite Palestinians. We are now in northern Jerusalem, about a 10-minute drive north of the old city, on a hill called Tel Al-Ful. When Jordan controlled the West Bank and East Jerusalem, the late King Hussein of Jordan began building his summer palace here. When Jordan lost control of this area in the 1967 war, his dream was frozen in time. In the northern part of Jerusalem, there is a very dense network of Jewish neighborhoods and Jerusalemite Palestinian neighborhoods. Jerusalemite Palestinians represent about 40% of the city's population. Some of them are Israeli citizens, but most of them are permanent residents of the State of Israel. As permanent residents, they are entitled to live and work in Israel and receive all the services and benefits of Israeli citizens, including health care, education, unemployment benefits, social security. We are on the ridge of Mount Scopus, on the edge of the Hebrew University campus. It is a 5-minute drive east of the old city, on the eastern border of Jerusalem and on the edge of the Judean desert. On a clear day, you can see from here the Dead Sea and the mountains of Jordan. Beneath Mount Scopus is part of an area called Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank. In this part of the West Bank, there is a mixture of Israeli communities and Palestinian communities located outside of Jerusalem and outside of the State of Israel. Growing up as a teenager in Jerusalem in the late 70s, I remember it as a time of Jewish-Arab coexistence. We used to shop, eat, and hang out in the old city of Jerusalem. Along the seam line between Jewish and Arab neighborhoods in the city, a peaceful routine existed. Jerusalem was a symbol of Jewish-Arab coexistence. However, this was an illusion that was shattered in 1987. Between 1987 and 1993, a generation of young Palestinians led a violent uprising against the Israeli government, known as the First Intifada. During these years, violence and bloodshed were a part of everyday life in Jerusalem. In those years, a Jewish Israeli who set foot in one of the Jerusalemite Palestinian neighborhoods was risking his life. And I had to go into these communities almost every day. The severe violence during the years of the Intifada motivated Israelis and Palestinians to turn to the path of negotiations and seek a solution and compromise. In 1993, Israel and the PLO signed an agreement called the Oslo Accords. As part of the agreement, the Palestinian National Authority was established. Today, the Palestinian Authority controls 50% of the West Bank and governs about 90% of the Palestinians in the West Bank. The optimism and the hope for a new path to peace crushed on the rocks of reality. For more than a decade, between 1994 and 2007, a wave of terror engulfed Israel. Palestinian suicide bombers attacked cities across the country. Almost all the suicide bombers came from the West Bank. In the deadly violence that raged during this period, more than 4,000 Palestinians, half of whom civilians, and more than 1,200 Israelis, most of whom civilians, were killed. To stop the wave of suicide bombers, Israel erected a security barrier about 430 miles long, separating the territory of the State of Israel from the territory of the West Bank. A bird's-eye view of Jerusalem shows the fabric of the city and its physical seam lines. Zooming out, we see West Jerusalem and East Jerusalem. On a daily basis, thousands of Arabs and Jews engage and interact with each other. Zooming in the old city of Jerusalem, thousands of Arabs and Jews live together side by side. In East Jerusalem, Jewish and Arab communities rub shoulders. Often, one street is the seam line between the two, and sometimes one street is home to both Arab and Jewish neighborhoods. The Palestinian Jerusalemite neighborhoods create a sort of a physical north-south corridor that stretches from the Palestinian city of Ramallah, the governing center of the Palestinian Authority north of Jerusalem, to the Palestinian city of Bethlehem, south of Jerusalem. This corridor crosses through Jerusalem on a route that more or less parallels the route of the Green Line that divided Jerusalem before 1967. The security barrier separates the northern branch of the Jerusalemite Palestinian corridor from Ramallah and the southern part from Bethlehem. And on the western and eastern side of this corridor are Jewish communities, both in West and East Jerusalem. In the eastern metropolitan area, beyond Jerusalem's municipal boundaries, there is a mixture of Israeli and Palestinian communities circling Jerusalem from north, northeast, east, and southeast. These communities form what I call a double parallel crescent. This crescent is not only outside of Jerusalem, it is also outside of the State of Israel. The Palestinians living in this crescent are citizens of the Palestinian Authority. The Israelis living in the parallel crescent are citizens of Israel. The picture of Jerusalem that we saw today shows us a very complex geopolitical map. What we are looking at is a reality that is largely irreversible. In this episode, we have zoomed out and looked at Jerusalem from a satellite perspective, and have learned that Jerusalem has many, many seam lines. In the upcoming episodes, we will zoom in to walk the streets and meet the people that live in some of the Arab and Jewish neighborhoods. While doing so, we will learn more about the seam lines that exist both within and between the communities. We will take a close look at reality in the shadow of a bloody conflict. We will understand what really drives the struggle within the city. We will discover that when it comes to the struggle in and over Jerusalem, there are greater forces at play than meet the eye. We will learn about the power of ordinary people to create a better reality for themselves and their neighbors. Also, and perhaps mainly, in times of chaos and fear. It is my hope that this series will also open the door to a constructive and productive approach to the discussion about Jerusalem and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. On the southeast corner of the old city of Jerusalem is an area about the size of a football field. In the international community, it is known as the Temple Mount compound. In Hebrew, it's called Har HaBayit. In Arabic, it is called Al-Haram al-Sharif. Whatever name you use, this patch of land is steeped in thousands of years of history, beliefs, narratives, passions, politics, construction and destruction, decline and revival. In the international discourse and media headlines, the Temple Mount is linked with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
כמה מאות צעירים שרפו דגלי ישראל וארצות הברית והשליחו אבנים לכל עבר.
المسجد الأقصى والقدس دونهما أرواحنا.
However, this is only one layer of the story. The Temple Mount is a controversial issue among Jews and Israelis, in the Arab world, and even within Islam itself. It is a stage for a massive power struggle that is reshaping the Middle East today. In Hebrew, the Temple Mount is called Har HaBayit, the mountain of the two Jewish temples. Har HaBayit is the holiest place for Jews. For 3,000 years, Jerusalem and Har HaBayit have been the beating heart of the Jewish people. On the Temple Mount, 2,000 years ago, a young Jewish man named Yeshua preached social justice, human brotherhood, and compassion. He will later be known as Jesus, and his legacy is the largest religion in the world, Christianity. In Arabic, Jerusalem is called Al-Quds, the holy. Jerusalem is not mentioned in the Quran, the holy book of Islam. Muslim theologians determined that a place in the Quran named Al-Aqsa, literally translated as the far edge, was Jerusalem. Islam occupied Jerusalem in the 7th century. On the Temple Mount, Muslim rulers built the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. That is why in Arabic, the Temple Mount compound is called Al-Haram al-Sharif, the noble sacred compound. Al-Aqsa is the third holiest site for Muslims after Mecca and Al-Madinah. דותן, שלום. תודה שהצטרפת אלינו.
תודה רבה שהזמנתם אותי.
אז בואו, תן לנו קצת איזשהו רקע לפתיחה על העניין הזה שנקרא הר הבית.
הר הבית למעשה מקודש, המקום המקודש ביותר לעם היהודי. לפי המסורת, היה מקום שבו נערכה עקדת יצחק, ועליו שלמה המלך בונה את בית המקדש הראשון. כמובן, לימים גם ייבנה בו גם בית המקדש השני.
שניהם הוחרבו.
שניהם, נכון. אחרי התפתחות האסלאם, מקימים פה גם המוסלמים שני אתרים מקודשים. 1266, בתקופה הזאת שולטים הממלוכים בירושלים, והם מוציאים צו שאוסר על בני דתות אחרות להיכנס להר הבית. זה למעשה הוראה שלטונית, הוראה דתית, שנשמרת במשך כ-600 שנה, ורק במחצית השנייה של המאה ה-19, הר הבית נפתח בפעם הראשונה ללא מוסלמים. אנחנו רואים שבאמת הנוצרים מאמצים את זה בחיבוק, בשתי ידיים הם לוקחים את האפשרות הזאת, והם מגיעים ומתחילים לסייר במקום. בשונה מהם, היהודים, יש להם בעיה. אנחנו מדברים על הנושא ההלכתי, שלפיו למעשה יש איסור כניסה להר הבית, מאחר שאנחנו טמאי מתים.
מגיעים לפה ראשוני החלוצים הציונים לקראת סוף המאה ה-19. איפה עומדת הציונות?
אותם בני היישוב החדש רואים בהר הבית, רואים בזה אטרקציה היסטורית מבחינתם. ככה הם מתייחסים אליו.
התנועה הציונית צוברת מומנטום, ובמקביל מתחיל להתפתח פה קונפליקט בין התנועה הציונית ובין ערביי ארץ ישראל / פלסטינה, שזה השם של המקום הזה אז. הערבים מפתחים איזשהו קונספט מאוד משמעותי בהקשר של הר הבית, שנקרא הר הבית בסכנה.
קודם כל חשוב להבין מתי התחילה האמירה הזאת שעל הר הבית בסכנה. כי יש לנו עובדות היסטוריות בנושא הזה. מספר חודשים לאחר הצהרת בלפור, הייתה ב2 לנובמבר 1917, כמה חודשים לאחר מכן נשלח מטעם ההסתדרות הציונית דוקטור חיים ויצמן, שוויצמן מגיע בדרכו לארץ ישראל, הערבים מפיצים שמועות מירושלים שמגיעות לוויצמן, שנמצא עוד במצרים, שהבריטים, הם ייתנו ליהודים את המקום הזה, את מתחם הר הבית, הם יאפשרו את הרס המסגד במקום שלהם. ותחתיו יבנו היהודים את בית המקדש. ככה זה למעשה זה מתפתח. בנאומו הראשון של ויצמן בירושלים, שהיה בסוף אפריל 1918, כבר אז הוא מבין את גודל הסכנה הצפויה מכאלו עלילות כנגד היהודים, אז הוא כבר בא ובעצם טוען, ובפני כל הנאום שלו נעשה בפני כל העדות, ובו הוא בעצם מציין שמה שהיה הוא מה שיהיה. הוא מיישר קו עם הסטטוס קוו הקיים.
אז פה אתה מכניס מושג לדיון שהוא שוב, הוא מאוד רלוונטי, המושג הזה של סטטוס קוו.
מה שאותם מעניין מבחינת היהדות הדתית, מבחינת הציונות המדינית, היא למעשה לאפשר את חופש הפולחן בכותל, היום הוא נראה דבר מובן מאליו. אז הוא ממש לא היה דבר מובן מאליו. זו בעצם הרחבת הכותל שהייתה עד למלחמת ששת הימים.
נכון, ואתה מביא אותנו באמת לנקודה הזאת שנקראת מלחמת ששת הימים 1967, שבעקבותיה ישראל נוטלת אחריות על המתחם של הר הבית.
כאן קודקוד 89, האם מוטה מדבר? עבור.
הר הבית בידינו, כאן תלמיד, הר הבית בידינו.
וכאן אנחנו רואים נקודת שינוי מאוד גדולה, והשאלה שאני רוצה לשאול אותך, בעקבות הסיפור הזה של 1967, אם אתה מזהה המשכיות של אותן מגמות שהיו גם בחשיבה הדתית היהודית וגם בחשיבה הציונית לפני 1967 ביחס להר הבית.
לדעתי יש פה המשכיות ודאי.
אני רואה פה, ואולי אני טועה, תתקן אותי. יש פה גם איזשהו שינוי נוסף מעניין שקרה אחרי 1967 והתגבר מאוד בעשורים האחרונים, וזה שהופיע זרם בתוך הפוליטיקה הישראלית הציונית, שהוא בעצם שילוב של דת ולאומיות, והזרם הזה כן מדגיש את העניין של הכניסה לתוך הר הבית.
הרעיון של להקים את בית המקדש והר הבית הוא מאוד מאוד קסם להם.
מה שאתה מתאר פה זה איזשהו לולאה, הייתי אומר אפילו כמעט טרגית, כי דיברנו על זה שבנרטיב הפלסטיני והערבי, מתחילת הציונות ומתחילת המאבק בין הציונות ובין התנועה הלאומית הפלסטינית, הנרטיב הזה של הר הבית בסכנה, מבחינת הראייה המוסלמית, הוא נרטיב מאוד חזק. אבל מצד שני דיברנו על זה שבעצם עובדתית או אובייקטיבית לא ממש הייתה הצדקה לחשש הזה, משום שגם הציונות וגם הממסד הדתי היהודי לא תמך בכניסה להר הבית. אבל עכשיו יש מציאות מעניינת שבה בעצם חיבור בין ציונות דתית ובין לאומיות, שבעצם זה מזין מחדש, אולי אפילו עוד יותר, את הנרטיב הפלסטיני המוסלמי שאומר הר הבית בסכנה, והם אומרים, הראיה, ההוכחה, הנה יהודים שנכנסים להר הבית כי הם רוצים או זוממים לפגוע בהר הבית.
השטח מדבר. לא מדברת פה עכשיו ההלכה הרשמית ולא מדינת ישראל הרשמית, אלא למעשה השטח ומה שקורה ונעשה במקום הקדוש, הוא למעשה יוצר בעצם את המציאות.
יש פה תופעה של ניסיון לקבוע עובדות בשטח על ידי גורמים, או ישראלים יהודים או ערבים פלסטינים, שמנסים כל אחד כמובן בהתאם לאג'נדה שלו לקבוע עובדות בשטח, כשבעצם היית אומר מגדיל את פוטנציאל הנפיצות של המקום הזה?
לפי מה שאנחנו רואים ומה שאנחנו מתרשמים, ודאי שכן, הוא מגדיל את האפשרויות הנפיצות.
For centuries, almost continuously, Al-Haram al-Sharif was ruled by Muslims. During the time that non-Muslims ruled the compound, the Crusader period ended from 1967 until today. The slogan Al-Difa' an al-Aqsa, defending Al-Aqsa, is a narrative that evokes emotional solidarity and political support across the Muslim world. مرحبا سيد
اهلا
مصطفى.
وسهلا يا مرحبا.
صباح الخير.
صباح النور، كيف حالك؟
شرفت، اهلا وسهلا. كيف
يا مرحبا يا مرحبا.
كيف العيله ان شاء الله
الحمد
بخير؟
لله بخير. كيف انتم؟ يعني دائما اما قصه محب لهذه البلده القديمه، لكن حقيقه زي قبه الصخره يعني كانها هي المحدد الجمالي لكل البلده القديمه.
Dr. Mustafa, Al-Aqsa is the third holiest site for Islam, ثالث الحرمين أولى القبلتين. For most of the history, the place was under Muslim rule, with the exception of two periods. One is the time of the Crusaders, and the other one is the rule of Israel since 1967. In the 20th century, in our time, one of the major slogans that is very much common in the Arab and the Muslim world in the context of Al-Aqsa is Ad-Difa' an Al-Aqsa, defending Al-Aqsa. To what extent do you think that this notion is expressing a real, genuine feeling of Muslims that Al-Aqsa is endangered? To what extent do you think it is something that is more artificial, or you don't think that component exists at all?
First of all, Al-Aqsa Mosque is the site to which the Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him, was taken in the night journey at night, Al-Isra. from Mecca to Jerusalem, from the noble sanctuary Al-Masjid Haram to Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. From an Islamic perspective, since we believe in all the previous prophets, all of them with no exception, and all the previous revealed books, Islam is the culmination of the history of revelation. And the Holy Land itself is mentioned as Holy Land in a context in which Prophet Moses, peace upon him, was addressing the children of Israel. And the land is also mentioned as a blessed land in the context of many prophets, including Prophet Abraham. Having said this, the land is obviously including Jerusalem, including Al-Aqsa Mosque. It occupies a special place in the Islamic worldview. And it has been part and parcel of Islamic theology, but also history. And this is why you'll find many Muslim families who stayed here, who came from Uzbekistan, who came from Afghanistan. All those people came to Jerusalem because of Al-Aqsa Mosque, and they stayed. And like any other land that has been governed by Muslims before, if it's occupied, then it becomes incumbent upon Muslims to liberate this land. If we talk about how do Muslims perceive whether the Crusader time or we talk about the Israeli occupation, it's on the same level, that it is a temporary phase and that ultimately the mosque should be in the hands. Now, some people might ask, why do Muslims need to liberate Al-Aqsa Mosque? Isn't everything okay? No, everything is not okay. Israel systematically, especially when you talk about the rise of the right-wing governments one after another, made sure to undermine what describe as the historical status quo. It seems that we are beyond a point of returning to the previous historical status quo.
One of your major fields of expertise is a very unique and intriguing intellectual Islamic scholar in the history of Islam, Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, who lived in the 11th and the 12th century. There is an interesting episode about Abu Hamid al-Ghazali in the context of Al-Quds, Jerusalem. This is a very significant milestone in the history of Jerusalem because in the year 1099, the Crusaders are occupying Jerusalem and the Haram al-Sharif. And Israeli famous Middle East scholar, Professor Emmanuel Sivan, wrote something very interesting about al-Ghazali in the context of Jerusalem. He said that al-Ghazali, though he lived in Jerusalem those years, he didn't really refer to this traumatic event, the occupation of al-Haram al-Sharif by the Christians. He didn't refer to that in his scripts. Why is that?
Imam al-Ghazali died in the year 1111, just to give it some time frame. And he's one of the top Muslim scholars in Islamic history. And in Jerusalem, he lived on top of the Gate of Mercy, which in English is the Golden Gate. His books did cover theology, jurisprudence. He was really one of the top scholars of jurisprudence and the philosophy of law. He covered ethics, he covered Sufism, so many topics, but he was not a historian.
Talking about al-Ghazali, let's say that al-Ghazali would have lived today. What do you think would be his approach to the whole issue of Al-Aqsa? Do you think that if he would look today at the story of Al-Aqsa, he would look at it rather from a more geopolitical perspective or more of like the more mystical, spiritual affiliation that he was tending to?
Al-Ghazali was big enough to realize that it's a small thing, that it will be beyond us. We need only to be just. That it is very, there are three legs to the table that we speak about: truth, justice, and peace. Truth comes before, we need to speak the truth. We need to address justice, and then we will have peace. Let me just finish by a story about Umar ibn Khattab himself, the second caliph. There once an emissary, like an ambassador today, who came and he saw Umar ibn Khattab. He asked about him. They told him he is sleeping under the tree there. And he said 3 words in Arabic. We need many words in English to translate this. He said, عَدَلْتَ فَأَمِنْتَ فَنِمْتَ. You must have been just. Therefore, you felt secure. And then you slept like this.
The Temple Mount is not only a stage for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Al-Haram al-Sharif is also a platform for a centuries-old power struggle. One is within Islam between Sunni Muslims, who are the majority, and Shiite Muslims, who are the minority. The second is between three civilizations, Arabs, Persians, and Turks. For centuries, these competing powers have been fighting each other for control, influence, and hegemony. In the Middle East, the past is the present. To understand the role of the Temple Mount in the competition and pursuit of regional leadership today, I would like to speak with Hussein Abdul Hussein, research fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracy. Hussein Abdul Hussein, thank you so much for joining this program. And I would like to start by asking you the following question. Al-Aqsa, Al-Haram al-Sharif, is the third holiest site for the Muslims in the world. Very interesting to notice that Shia Islam doesn't really associate any special importance to that specific site. Why is that?
Historically, the Shia viewed Jerusalem as a shrine constructed by the enemies of the Shia.
Here is a very puzzling phenomenon of our times. Current regime in Tehran, they are very much centralizing themselves and positioning themselves as the defenders of Al-Aqsa. What is the explanation to that contradiction?
All of this is politics. None of this is rooted anywhere in history. The only explanation possible is that the Islamist regime of Iran tried to use this not as a pitch for the Shia, but as a pitch for the Sunnis. And this was Khomeini's way of declaring his Islamist regime as a pan-Islamist regime that includes both the Shia and the Sunni. I think Khomeini tried to use Jerusalem against Mecca because Mecca is under the control of the Saudis, and the Saudis are his rivals. So this game is not new. This game goes back 1400 years in Islamic history, where you use a pitch to counter the pitch of the others.
I saw some very interesting narrative I never came across. And that is, there are some Muslim theologians, Sunnis, not Shiites, and researchers that actually argue that Al-Aqsa is not in Jerusalem. They identify Al-Aqsa with a mosque called Al-Ja'raneh, which is located some 20 miles northwest of Mecca. Is it possible to assume that it has something to do with the political power struggle that you described before over the whole issue of Al-Aqsa?
Well, what bothers me is that this debate is being used as a deed to prove sovereignty. So what Khomeini or Palestinians or anyone trying to use this argument is to say, okay, this is really holy to us in our religion, and therefore we should have sovereignty over it. I don't think sovereignty is connected to such an issue. You can have the holiest site of any religion anywhere and not have the sovereignty over it.
I want to look at another regional player. We talked about the Shiites and the Sunnis and the Iranian regime. We mentioned Saudi Arabia. Turkey. Turkish President Erdogan is very much emphasizing the whole story of Al-Aqsa and defending Al-Aqsa, and where he stands on this whole story.
Turkey is really interesting example because, I mean, the Turkish claim to Islam, even within Islamic circles, is several notches weaker than others. In Islam started as an Arab religion. I think they watch what's in the news and they try to exploit whatever everybody else is trying to exploit. In this case, is Jerusalem and Al-Aqsa.
Palestinians are Sunni Muslims. The two main Palestinian political powers are the nationalist Fatah movement, the backbone of the Palestinian Authority that governs parts of the West Bank, and the Islamist Hamas movement that governs the Gaza Strip since 2007. There is a bitter ideological and political rivalry between Fatah and Hamas. I want to kind of like zoom in and take it into another arena, which is more domestic, and that is the inner Palestinian arena. There are two major Palestinian players today. One is Fatah, the other one is Hamas. Hamas is coming from the Muslim Brotherhood hub, which is the biggest mass movement in the Muslim Sunni world. There is a very strong rivalry between the two over the issue of the Temple Mount compound, or Al-Aqsa. Why is that?
Well, I think Hamas is, I mean, they pretend to be Palestinian, but their platform has always been Islamist. And this, to me, clashes with what Fatah thinks, is that this is supposed to be the symbol of Palestinian statehood and nationalism.
There is one place we haven't mentioned, but it's very significant in the context of Al-Aqsa, and this is, of course, Jordan. Jordan signed a peace treaty with Israel, and Article 9 of that peace treaty specifically said that Jordan is the counterpart for future negotiation regarding the Islamic and Christian sites in Jerusalem. That article actually evoked a power struggle between Jordan and the Palestinians.
Al-Aqsa compound is under the custody of the Jordanian Hashemite royal family. And this is both a blessing and a curse for the Jordanians, because on one hand, they tried to extract themselves from this conflict and decided that, okay, let the Palestinians decide for themselves. On the other hand, they still have this heritage and legacy of being custodians of holy sites, so they find themselves dragged back into this conflict. I don't see that there's any reasonable scheme of peace between Israel and the Palestinians where the Jordanian Hashemite monarchy is not involved in it.
You see that to a large extent the story of Jerusalem is some sort of like a pawn used to played by different players.
Well, absolutely.
Hussein Abdul Hussein, thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you, Avi.
The Temple Mount is a story of cultural, emotional, political, religious, and spiritual identity. It exists on a seam line between tolerance and fanaticism. A stage for constant friction, the Temple Mount is always under the international microscope. But there is another aspect of the Temple Mount not discussed in the international arena. The call to liberate Al-Aqsa and Middle East politics are intertwined in an endless loop. On the one hand, the centrality of the slogan reflects a genuine concern that Al-Aqsa is in danger. On the other hand, Muslim leaders often use the narrative of liberating Al-Aqsa to further their own agenda, divert criticism, harvest political dividends, or gain the upper hand over their rivals. Recognizing that loop, connecting the dots, knowing the players involved, and identifying their goals is essential for anyone that truly wants to understand the Temple Mount, Jerusalem, Israel, and the Middle East. A hot summer day, August 1990. I received a message that the bodies of two young Jewish boys, Onen Karamani and Lior Tubul, were found in a forest in northern Jerusalem. The two were murdered by Palestinians. Within hours, Jerusalem was on fire. Violence broke out on the seam lines between Jewish and Arab neighborhoods throughout the city. A Palestinian man named Izzat Khalaile was murdered by a Jewish mob. To calm the flames, I went with Teddy Khaled, the legendary mayor of Jerusalem, to some of those seam-line neighborhoods to meet with local Jewish and Arab leadership. On that hot day, I learned that the flames of conflict over and within Jerusalem never go out. They are always there, smoldering like a volcano. And sometimes they erupt.
אוקיי, אז הנה פה הכפר, קרוב מאוד, זה הגן, מרחק של מספר צעדים, אין פה הרבה מה להתאמן.
מעבר לכביש, מטרים ספורים מגני הילדים החשופים, נמצא ג'בל מוכבר.
זה שכן שלנו, הרוצח הוא שכן פה מהכפר ממש ליד.
It was the first time in my role that I experienced this firestorm, and it wasn't the last.
The 3 Israeli cars were set alight on Mir and Nakar Street sometime after 1 o'clock last night and were discovered by their owners this morning. Mir and Nakar Street in East Talpiot is only a few meters from the Arab village of Jabal Mukaber.
It was a freezing February evening in 1993. Earlier that day, a Jewish resident of East Talpiot, a young man named Yecheskel Mizrahi, was stabbed to death right here at this bus stop. Hundreds, maybe thousands of enraged residents of East Talpiot gathered right here. Police forces deployed between them and their Arab neighbors. The Jewish residents presented a list of demands to address their concerns. At the top of the list, build a fence to divide the two communities. I remember thinking to myself, that is not going to happen. I was wrong. A fence was built. The issue was that that fence did not divide anyone from anyone. It ended after 100 yards. That night I made an inner decision that I was going to do whatever I could to change the reality of these two neighborhoods. It takes two to tango. The circumstances, conditions, and needs of the neighboring Arab community are different from those of East Talpiot. Can pragmatic dialogue between such different neighborhoods meet the needs of both sides? To answer that question, we are going to visit Jabal al-Mukaber, a Jerusalemite Palestinian neighborhood of about 30,000 people that literally sits on the slopes of East Talpiot. The name Jabal al-Mukaber means the greater mountain. Jabal al-Mukaber is a unique community. The neighborhood was originally started by Bedouins who settled here in the beginning of the 20th century. Bedouin society is tribal. Each tribe is made up of a number of large families. The executive committee, if you will, of the tribe is a council. The council is comprised of the head of each family in the tribe. A key leader in traditional Arab society is the Mukhtar. The word Mukhtar means elected. It usually refers to a person who belongs to the largest family, and the role is often handed down from father to son. The Mukhtar is an official position. He is the representative of the community and the liaison between the community and the government. The young Palestinian who led the violent intifada also rebelled against the traditional Palestinian leadership. Arab leadership across Jerusalem collapsed, but some Mukhtars retained their power and influence. One who was an active leader in the pragmatic dialogue is the oldest acting Mukhtar in Jerusalem, Mukhtar Mahmoud Hamdan Hussein, Abu Muhammad.
نزلنا من غاد ها والقرية الغاد هناك أبو ديس So I'm visiting a good old friend of mine, Mukhtar Mahmoud Hamdan Hussein Abu Muhammad. Thank you so much for hosting us. Mukhtar Mahmoud, مرحبا أهلا وسهلا. شكرا جزيلا على المقابلة.
أهلا وسهلا فيك كصديق وأخ عزيز من سنين عديدة ومن الناس المحترمين ومن الناس اللي يمكن التعايش معهم والتفاهم معهم ومعنيين في المصلحة العامة والصالح العام في المنطقة.
بالفعل أنت حافظ تاريخ القدس وحافظ تاريخ المنطقة، منطقة جبل المكبر. احكي لنا شوية عن الأسرة، عن تاريخ الأسرة والمنطقة.
موضوع بتشعب من شعبتين في حياتي الشخصية ووضع المنطقة ككل. حياتي الشخصية أنا تزوجت وعمري 16 سنة. الحمد لله خلفت 18.
الحمد لله.
أخوتي 8، أولادي 9 كذكور. أكثرهم خلصوا جامعات، دكتور أو محامي أو مهندس أو صيدلي. بالنسبة للمنطقة كمنطقة كانت وين وصارت وين. يعني المنطقة ما كانش في شوارع، ما كانش في سيارات، ما كانش في، كانت الشوارع نسبة ضئيلة جدا. ففي عام 67 تغير الوضع وتم احتلال شرقي القدس بما فيها الضفة الغربية، بما فيها الجولان، بما فيها سيناء. فهذا كان قدر، يعني ما حدش له سلطة أو سيطرة على القدر تبعه. وبدأ التغيير وسلم أو استلم أو كان مستلم أمانة القدس إنسان فعلا كان أمين، اللي هو السيد تيدي كوليك، في الوقت اللي ما فيش ممثل لشرقية القدس في بلدية القدس. فكان هو يعتبر نفسه هو الممثل والمسؤول، وأنه القدس أماني سواء كانت شرقية أو غربية، بدون تمييز، بدون تفريق، بدون أي عنصرية. هذا كان عصره. مت هذه الحاجة صرنا نعيش في عالم ثاني. المعاملة تغيرت، الأسلوب تغير، الطريقة تغيرت. أصبحت نظرة البلدية لا يعنيها وجهاء شرقي القدس ولا شخصيات شرقي القدس ولا من هم مسؤولين في شرقي القدس. السياسة مالناش دعوة فيها، السياسة لها ناسها، لها رجالاتها. السياسة ما لهاش لا عهد ولا وعد ولا نظام ولا مبدأ ولا أخلاق. هذه السياسة في كل العالم. احنا بعنينا الوضع الاجتماعي اللي بنعيش فيه. كانت عندنا مدرسة، صارنا 20 مدرسة بس في عهد تيدي كوليك وأولمارت. كانت عندنا روضة، صارت 20 روضة. كانت في الشوارع، صار في شوارع.
أنت بصفتك زعيم للمنطقة، كنت على العلاقات خدمة الجميع، خدمة المنطقة. كنت يعني العلاقات مع جميع الزعماء، إما العرب أو اليهود، من رؤساء البلديات، رئيس الدولة، رئيس الحكومة، لأنه الناس كانت تحترم دورك المهم كزعيم للجمهور في منطقة جبل المكبر كما تفضلت. كمان موضوع التعايش والحوار كان موضوع مهم جدا بالنسبة لك. شو رأيك بالنسبة لهذا الموضوع؟
رأيي بهذا الموضوع أنا قلت لك إياه، إنه بعد 67 لما جاء واحد زي تيدي كوليك، لما جاء واحد زي حايم البلدس، لما جاء واحد زي أوهد أولمرت، كانت أبوابهم مفتوحة لوجهاء شرقي القدس للتعاون، للسماع طلباتهم، لإعطاء ما يمكن أو بالإمكان إعطائه. وهذا خلق جو كلغة مشتركة، كلغة تعايش. بدأت تضعف هذه الطريقة. كان اختلاط بيننا، كان مجاملات بيننا، لحد ما خلقت جدار العزل والفصل هذه، وصار الأخو في الضفة الغربية وأخو الثاني في القدس، اللي ما كانتش موجودة في زمن إسحاق نبون وزمن تيدي كوليك. شرقي القدس، عرب شرقي القدس، احنا في 67 كنا نمثل تقريبا الثلث، 30% من السكان. اليوم بنمثل 40% من السكان. لكن السؤال اللي بيطرح نفسه، هل احنا بناخذ خدمات او متطلبات او محتاجات 40%؟ لا، بجوز ناخذ 4%.
ولكن بالانتفاضة الأولى واجهنا تحدي كبير، وأنا عملت مشروع للحوار العملي بين الزعماء من الحي اليهودي وزعماء العرب من منطقة جبل المكبر، وأنت كنت جزء مهم من هذه المرحلة، وعملنا حوار عملي بين الناس. وشو كانت توقعاتك من هذا الحوار العملي هذاك الأيام؟
طبيعي يكون في لغة مشتركة، يكون في لغة تفاهم، في لغة إنه أقدر أعيش معك وتعيش معي، وفيش قدامنا مفر إلا نتعايش معه في الوقت اللي إنه نسبة تزايد السكان كبيرة. وهينا اليوم وصلنا لمرحلة ما ظلش أرض في شرقي القدس، في سكان كثير بدأوا يخرجوا أو يطلعوا بالألوف مش بالعدد البسيط في الضفة الغربية، لأنه ما فيش ما ظلش أراضي صالحة للبناء أو مسموح البناء فيها.
هل شعرت بعد المشروع المشترك اللي عملناها بالنسبة للحوار العملي، هل شعرت أنه كانت هناك شبه من إنجازات لحي جبل المكبر من الحي اليهودي المجاور؟
كان في لغة تفاهم حصلت فترة معينة. في الفترة اللي أنت بتحكي عنها كان في لغة مشتركة، كانوا يجوا عندنا نيجي عندهم، يتعاونوا معنا فيما يخص البلد من مشاريع. يعني نطلب شارع أو نطلب روضة أو نطلب كمان هم يضغطوا معنا بثقلهم في البلدية.
بناء على كلامك، نتيجة للحوار العملي كانت هناك فترة للإنجازات ملموسة
أكيد
بالنسبة لأهل جبل المكبر بما يتعلق بموضوع الشوارع والروضات الأطفال والضغط على البلدية وإلى آخره. هل كانت عندك توقعات إضافية للاستمرارية هذا الحوار العملي؟
طبيعي
ومزيدا من الإنجازات مثل ما؟
طبيعي، لكن كأنك بتطلب شيء مش راح تحصل عليه. تغيرت السياسة ككل.
يعني إذا أنا فاهم من كلامك إنه فعلا على المستوى المحلي الحوار العملي بين الحارتين، بين أرمون النتسيب وبين
ممتاز جدا، بيجيب أحسن نتائج.
كان مثمر
100%،
ولكن صار انعكاس سلبي نتيجة للتغيير بالسياسة
بالزبط.
الإقليمية، بالسياسة العليا. يعني اليوم لو صار اليوم شبه من حوار عملي إضافي أو جديد بين أهل جبل المكبر وهاي الحي اليهودي المجاور أرمون النتسيب، شو راح تكون توقعاتك إذا أنت راح تكون شريك بهذا الحوار؟ شو راح يكون توقعاتك من الجهة اليهودية، من الزعامة اليهودية بالنسبة للخدمات أو بالنسبة لأهل جبل المكبر؟
راح تكون صعبة جدا، لأنه حدث بيننا زي تجيب لوح قزاز وبتكسره، مش من السهل إنك تلحمه. كل هذه الحاجات لها نتيجة، زي بتزرع شيء بده يطلع وبده يكبر.
يعني أنت بتقول لي إنه أنا لما عملت المشروع واشتغلنا مع بعض مع الزعماء العرب واليهود نجحنا ببناء الثقة، ولكن اليوم فيش هناك ثقة؟
اتدمر بالضبط، تكسرت.
Hate and fear build fences. But where a fence is built, it is also possible to build a bridge.
אהלן, לא ידעתי שאת פגישתנו יסריטו בצורה... מה נשמע? וואו.
בסדר, מה שלומך? בזמנו שעשינו את הפרויקט ואת היית חלק נורא מרכזי בפרויקט, וזה דיאלוג פרגמטי, את זוכרת? וכשהסתיים הדיאלוג היה משהו מאוד מעניין. החבר'ה של ג'בל מוכבר, עובדי, ליסון וזה, הם הזמינו אתכם לסיור בשכונה. וביום של הסיור היה אוטובוס שהם הביאו, ואנחנו עומדים פה לפני תחילת הסיור. אני לא אשכח את זה כל החיים שלי, יש דברים שלא שוכחים. ואני זוכר אותך עומדת, שמה את הרגל על המדרגה של האוטובוס, את מסתכלת עליו, אומרת לי ככה, אומרת לי, תשמע, 18 שנה אני חיה פה. כף רגלי מעולם לא דרכה במקום הזה, ואני מרגישה כאילו עכשיו אני נכנסת לארץ של אויב. זה השתנה התחושה?
כן. כן. קודם כל, יש לי הרבה יותר אמון באנשים, ואני מאמינה שטובים ורעים יש בשני צידי הגבול הזה.
אז הגדרת את זה ארץ אויב. היום את מגדירה את זה שכנים?
שכנים. לגמרי.
טלי ותמי, שלום. טלי, אני רוצה לשאול אותך שאלה, אני דווקא רוצה להתחיל איתך. לפני 30 שנה נענית לפנייה שלי לנהל, לבנות דיאלוג פרגמטי, מה שקראתי דיאלוג פרגמטי בין שכונת תלפיות מזרח לבין שכונת ג'בל מוכבר הערבית שגובלת בתלפיות מזרח. את היית אז מנהלת בית הספר, והיית גורם מאוד מרכזי בכל התהליך של השיחות שהתקיימו אז בינינו, וגם הפרויקטים שזה הניב והקשרים שזה הניב כתוצאה מזה. וכשדיברנו היום ככה והזכרנו קצת בימים ההם, אמרת משפט מאוד מעניין, אמרת, פעלתי מתוך נאיביות. את יכולה להסביר את האמירה הזאת?
כשאמרתי שאני פעלתי מתוך נאיביות, אני בעיקר התכוונתי אל הסובבים אותי, הורים של תלמידים. היה סיפור שלם. מה זה הערבים האלה פה פתאום איתנו?
אז בנקודה הזו אני רוצה להפנות שאלה דומה אלייך, תמי. גם את פעלת מתוך תחושה של נאיביות, או שזה משהו אחר?
אני רוצה להגיד שקודם כל גדלתי בשכונה כילדה, ורק לחבר ביני לבין טלי, לפני 30 שנה הייתי בת 14, זה אומר שהייתי נערה, ואני חושבת שיש גם קצת הבדלים במה שקרה, אז הייתי נערה קצת אחרי האינתיפאדה הראשונה, זאת אומרת, היה סביבה מאוד מאוד לא נעימה לחיות בה. אני ממש גרה גם היום, ממש ברחוב הזה. והנוף שלי זה ההר של צור באהר עם הבתים. וגם כילדה, זה מה שהייתי רואה. ויש משהו פשוט מוזר בזה שרואים כל הזמן את אותו נוף, את אותו הר עם בתים, ואף פעם לא מכירים אף אחד שגר שם. רציתי לבדוק, רציתי לחפש אפשרויות אחרות, ולא לקבל את זה כגורל שפשוט ככה זה. זה ירושלים, זה אפילו גם לחיות בשכונת קו תפר. פחד זה חלק מהסיפור, אין לנו מה לחפש, אין לנו מה לבנות קשרים, ככה, כזה. וזה משהו שהיה נראה לי פשוט לא בריא, לא נורמלי, בטח לא משהו שצריך לקבל אותו.
טליה, אמרת, בשנים שחלפו מאז האינתיפאדה הראשונה, מאז שעשינו את הפרויקט ביחד, תחושת הביטחון האישי שלך ביחס לשכנים, התחזקה, אבל כשמסתכלים על מה שקרה מאז השנים הללו, ראינו הסלמה מאוד קשה של האלימות. תקופת האינתיפאדה השנייה, הפיגועים הגדולים וכו'. יש פה איזשהו דיסוננס, איך את מסבירה את זה?
תחושת הביטחון שלי עלתה ככל שאני הבנתי וראיתי שבעצם יש כאן שתי קבוצות שבתכלס רוצות לחיות בשקט, להתפרנס, לגדל ילדים, ליהנות מהסביבה, ובתוך שתי הקבוצות יש פורעי חוק ושנאה וגזענות. זאת אומרת, אני לא חושבת שהקרבה שלי כתושבת אל ג'בל מוכבר או צור באהר, זה מה שעלול לסכן את חיי. אני חושבת שככל שהקרבה שלנו תהיה יותר אנושית, יותר זמינה, אז יהיה יותר נעים לחיות פה.
תמי, אני רוצה לשאול אותך, במובן מסוים את מעין איזשהו דור המשך במרכאות לפעילות של טלי.
לגמרי.
היה משהו שלקחת מהשיחות עם טלי, יישמת אותו וראית שהוא מסייע לך בפעילות שלך היום, 30 שנה אחרי, בתחום הזה?
אני קודם כל באמת מרגישה דור המשך, וצריך להגיד, אנחנו שתינו עובדות במנהל הקהילתי של תלפיות מזרח, שנמצא ממש פה, ולכן התחושה באמת של פרויקט מאוד גדול שהיה, ומשהו חדש שממשיך, היה מאוד מרגש גם לטלי, ולקשר בינינו, בכלל לראות שיש דבר כזה שממשיך באמת בדור הבא. אני יכולה להגיד קודם כל בגדול שאני לוקחת מטלי איזה מין עמוד שדרה כזה מאוד איתן ומאוד חזק, שמאוד מאוד ברור לו ומאוד חדור מטרה לגבי החשיבות בנושא הזה, בקידום הקשר ובכלל באמת בראיית הפנים האנושיות והאפשרויות. יש לי את הנחישות שלי, אבל אני גם במקום של דברים יכולים פתאום אני לא רוצה להגיד לערער אותי, אבל ממקום טוב, אני גם חושבת שזה מקום טוב להיות בשאלות כאלה. קוראים אירועי מאי. לי זה תמיד, כאילו אני אומרת, זה המלחמה הראשונה שלי בתפקיד. זו פעם ראשונה שהייתי בסיטואציה הזאת. וכן, זה מעורר אצלי שאלות טובות. והתמודדתי איתן, ודיברתי איתן עם השותפות שלי, הפלסטיניות מהכפרים, ועברנו את זה.
אני חוזר אלייך, תמי, עם שאלה, משום שזה קשור לעניין של מנהיגות. את ציינת את הקושי של המנהיגות הפלסטינית בשכונה הסמוכה שאת עובדת איתה. את חושבת שפרויקט מסוג כזה ועשייה מסוג כזה מחייבת מנהיגות יותר גלויה, גם אם הנסיבות לא כל כך נוחות?
אני בוודאי שלא במקום של להציב תנאים. אני במקום של לעבוד עם מה שיש. רוב הציבור הירושלמי, הישראלי, היהודי, כל כך לא יודע על כל כך הרבה דברים שקשורים למזרח ירושלים. למדתי מה זה נורמליזציה, למדתי מה זה אומר לשתף פעולה. אני עובדת עם נשים שהן מבחינתן מאוד בעניין של להכיר, ללמוד שפה ולעשות דברים ביחד, אבל המשפחה המורחבת שלהן היא ממש נגד. הרבה פעמים הן גם שומרות על זה בסוד, הן אפילו לפעמים משקרות, ולא מספרות שהן באות לפעילות. זה לא קל באופן כללי לעבוד עם שותף או שותפה שזה סוד. פייסבוק הוא אקס-טריטוריה. אני לעולם לא אפרסם משהו בפייסבוק, אני לעולם לא אפרסם משהו עם לוגויים, אבל זה גם באמת מעלה הרבה סימני שאלה של יהודים ישראלים ירושלמים, ששואלים עד כמה הם רציניים, זה בוודאי מכביד על המהלך עצמו.
כשעשינו בזמנו את הפרויקט, זה גם התקיים בחשאיות גדולה. הימים היו באמת אז ימים של פיגועי התאבדות בין השאר. היינו נפגשים עם המנהיגות הפלסטינית השכנה, ומפגשים חשאיים. ואני, כשבאתי לפרויקט הזה, אמרתי, תראו, המטרה שלי בפרויקט הזה זה לא שמוחמד וטלי ישתו קפה ויגידו, טלי בן אדם נהדר ומוחמד הוא בן אדם נהדר, אלא שיהיה יכולת של מנהיגות משני הצדדים לזהות צרכים פרגמטיים ששני הצדדים יכולים להיעזר אחד בשני במימושם. והפרויקט הזה מבחינתי השיג את המטרה שלו משום שהיו כמה וכמה דברים מאוד מוחשיים שיצאו כתוצאה מהפרויקט הזה. למשל, ההנהגה הפלסטינית זיהתה את ההנהגה של תלפיות מזרח כהנהגה שיכולה לפעול עבורה כלובי מול העירייה. וזה היה מקום של זיהוי של אינטרס מאוד חיוני. אבל הייתה ציפייה מהצד של תלפיות מזרח, מהמנהיגות הפלסטינית, שהם ישמיעו קול נגד עניין האלימות במרחב תפר שבין השכונות. והם השמיעו קול. טלי, זה מבחינתך היה איזושהי נקודה שאמרת לעצמך, הפרויקט הזה משיג?
כן. הייתה לי קולגה יוצאת מן הכלל, פאטמה אל-גול, עליה השלום. שהיא
גם הייתה מנהלת בית ספר.
היא הייתה מנהלת בית ספר, והיא בפירוש אמרה, כולנה בני אדם. ומעבר לתוכנית שהפגישה את הילדים, היינו נפגשות, בואו נראה איך אנחנו יכולים לעזור זו לזו. למשל, היא לימדה עברית בבית ספר. אז אמרתי, נהדר, מורה שלנו הייתה נוסעת לג'בל מוקבר, אל הבית ספר של פאטמה אל-גול, ומורה שלה הייתה מגיעה אלינו, לא זוכרת מה, בחורה מדהימה, דיברה עברית שוטפת, לימדה ערבית. אנחנו עשינו סיור לבניית מגרש... משחקים. נדמה לי שזה גם בסוף יצא לפועל.
כן.
אז הבאנו את אנשי העירייה ונכנסנו ואמרנו, אנחנו רוצים להשוות תנאים, אנחנו שכנים. פה יש מגרשי משחקים, לא כל כך הרבה כמו היום, אבל בכל זאת, גם הם צריכים. אז כן, זה היה חלק מהדיל.
אני שמח לדעת שבסופו של דבר, באמת, הכיוון הזה של דיאלוג פרגמטי שמניב עשייה, מה שאני קורא small arrangements או small achievements on the ground, בעצם מייצר איזשהו גלגל מסוים של שינוי.
כן, ושל קרבה.
את עובדת גם על מודל של small arrangements או small achievements?
בהחלט. אני גם שמחה לשמוע את המושג הזה של דיאלוג פרגמטי, כי לא שמעתי אותו עד עכשיו, והוא מאוד מאוד יפה, גם בגלל אני קצת צוחקת, כי הוא משקף את הדיאלוג שזה יותר הצד היהודי, והפרגמטי שזה יותר הצד הפלסטיני. אז זה כאילו מצליח איכשהו בדיוק לעשות את החיבור ביניהם. שהעשייה המשותפת, או המענה על הצורך המשמעותי, הוא ההוכחה הטובה ביותר לכך שיש אלטרנטיבה. שכדאי, שאפשר לעשות משהו. נשים שנפגשו בתוך תוכנית שנקראת חממה ליוזמות קהילתיות ועסקיות משותפות, נפגשו ובעצם בנו מין מחנה קיץ משותף לצעירים עם צרכים מיוחדים מהשכונה שלנו ומהכפרים הסמוכים. וכשהבאנו את המשפחות ואת הקהילה לערב סיום חגיגי, שהקראנו את הסרטון שהם עשו ביחד עם חלוקת תעודות, היה איזה מחנה משותף ואיזה ברית גורל.
In many conflicts, big politics fan the flames of tensions and frictions between neighbors. But that doesn't mean that seamline communities have to be doomed to an endless loop of enmity and violence. The people we met chose to be leaders. They chose accountability over victimhood. They chose pragmatic dialogue over animosity and suspicion. The path they chose was not easy one, and it's not easy today. There have been many ups and downs. There are countless obstacles. There is no guarantee of success. It is not necessarily a love affair, and the work is never complete. Pragmatic dialogue does not end conflict. The achievements are not necessarily big enough to make the headlines. And sometimes, in spite of everyone's efforts, other forces work against you. Yet 30 years ago and today, people like Mukhtar Mahmoud, Tali, Tami, and other people, Jews and Arabs, prove accountable leadership and pragmatic dialogue can contribute to cooperation between individuals who are strangers and between communities that are in conflict. And if it works in Jerusalem, it can work anywhere.
I hope you all found that as interesting and enlightening as I did when I first saw it. I'm going to have a conversation with Avi for about 15 minutes or so, and then there'll be questions from you. So have those questions ready. Firstly, Avi, thank you very much for making this film and for joining us, of course. What I wanted to start with was at the very beginning of the film, you talked about your younger years growing up in Jerusalem, in a very different Jerusalem, pre-First Intifada, where you described it as a model of Jewish-Arab coexistence, which I think is hard for many of us living in today's Jerusalem to relate to, unfortunately. So what I wanted to ask you was, in your view, was the collapse of that Jerusalem inevitable? Was that always going to happen? Were there things that could have been done differently, either by Israeli authorities or Arab leaders or both, that could have forestalled that reality?
Yes, that was inevitable, because it goes back to something I said towards the end of what you saw today when I was talking about the fact that in the end of the day, there are larger factors that are involved in shaping the reality. One of the things that we are doing in our activities in our institute inside the Middle East, we all the time talk about the big picture of the Middle East and how it impacts the story of the conflict, how it can impact the life of people, individuals. So, for example, if we are talking about the story of the Intifada in Jerusalem, and you ask me if it was inevitable, and I'm saying yes, it was inevitable. Basically, what I'm saying is an example that there has been, for example, a strengthening of Islamization in the Arab world in the 70s, the 60s, the 70s. It was crisis of Arab governments. So there were different deep streams that basically, in the end of the day, radiated and impacted also the reality in Jerusalem, which, by the way, this is one of the major, I would say, one of the major insight
that we always, in our work inside the Middle East, in our institute, we always emphasize that in the end of the day, if you want to understand Israel and the reality in Israel, you must understand the story of the Middle East.
Right, so just as it's impossible to separate Jerusalem from the wider Israeli story, it's also impossible to separate Israel from the wider regional story. Okay, I wanted to ask you something, a clarifying question. I don't know how much everyone in the room knows about these matters, probably some more than others, but let's get some clarification. You were dealing with in your work in the mayor's office, you were dealing with the Arab population of Jerusalem, which is distinct from both Arab citizens of Israel in the rest of Israel, effectively, and also from Palestinians living in Judea and Samaria and Gaza. So can you say something about the unique status of Arab Jerusalemites in relation to those other Arab populations?
I think that one of the most, if not the most unique aspect of the specific Jerusalemite Palestinians is the fact that in the end of the day, most of them choose to remain permanent residents. They could become fully citizens. They don't, and it's very significant to understand why don't they. The reason for that is because that specific legal status as permanent resident enabled them to navigate a very complex multi-layer identity. They are, on the one hand, Palestinians. They view Israel as an occupier. Most of them are Muslims in their religion. They identify with the Arab world. They see themselves as part of the Arab world. At the same time, they are very much woven to a large extent with the Israeli experience, working, counterparts, and so on and so on. So as a Jerusalemite Palestinian, you kind of like live in a very interesting twilight area where you have to navigate this very different component of identity. And so by keeping that specific status, they are able at the same time to feel faithful to their brothers and at the same time to keep their legal status.
Right, and as non-citizens, they can't vote in national elections, but they can vote in municipal elections, but few of them do, right? It's not most of them don't, right? Most of them choose not to.
That is correct, and that was always the case, and that reflects the part of the Jerusalemite Palestinian identity that says, in the end of the day, in that specific context, participating or not participating in the elections to the municipality, we are giving priority to our national affiliation.
Right, right. So one of the, you devoted a whole episode pretty much to the question of Har HaBayit, the Temple Mount, and we showed that episode here as part of this compilation. And it's obviously its importance to Jews and to Muslims. How do you see the relevance of Har HaBayit in the current, both in the current conflict that we're dealing with right now and in the wider issue of Hamas, Islamist extremism, the threat we face, the threat Israel faces from those forces? Because it seems like even though Gaza is a long way, relatively speaking, in Little Israel, relatively speaking from Jerusalem, it always features in the rhetoric of groups like Hamas.
Yes, definitely. Look, when you look, obviously, right now, the whole situation, the whole war, just as a reminder, Hamas called it Tufan al-Aqsa, which means the flood of al-Aqsa. And we all remember that it's, in the previous rounds, military rounds, Hamas and Islamic Jihad all the time emphasized the story of liberating al-Aqsa, defending al-Aqsa. So it's very clear that it's present out there. But I think also in the context of what we saw in this series, and by the way, remember, that series was done before the war.
Right.
One of the things that I was talking with our guest, Hussein Abdul Hussein, which is, by the way, a very interesting person for himself. He's a Lebanese and Iraqi Shiite. And he was talking about how the story of Al-Aqsa is, in the end of the day, to a large extent, a pawn that is being used both in the context of the inner Palestinian struggle as well as in the context of the story of the Middle East. And let me tell you something, with all my work right now in the context of the war, I was in the States, I'm going back to the States, I did many, many briefings and Zooms and sessions. I explained to people the whole story of Al-Aqsa in a regional context, in the context of the Middle East, and to a large extent, this is something that people totally are unfamiliar with.
Right. Actually, one piece of information that was completely new to me was how Al-Aqsa is not theologically part of Shiite Islam in that way, and the fact that it's become such a major part of Iranian rhetoric and Iranian sort of policy or pushing a certain policy around the region just shows you that it's not that this isn't just about, this is so much about politics and so much about the ambitions of countries like Iran.
That is so accurate. I mean, just today, a couple of hours before I came, I gave an interview to Bloomberg, and they asked me about the story of the Houthis, which I guess you're familiar, you heard about the story of the Houthis. And I actually told him, look, the Houthis are playing the card of Al-Aqsa and defending the Palestinians. The Houthis couldn't care less about the Palestinians, nor about Al-Aqsa. But it goes back to the story of being pawn used for different purposes.
Right. Okay, so staying with the current situation that we find ourselves in, when the final segment was talking about Jabal Mukaber and the relationship and the amazing work that you did and others like Tammy and Tali who are here did with partnerships between Jews and Arabs in these neighborhoods. Also, cards on the table, I live in Amon and Atziv, so I'm also somewhat invested in this success of this kind of project. How do you see neighborhoods like Jabal Mukaber in this current situation? Because I would guess that they are potentially quite explosive places right now. And if that's the case, I mean, you can tell me if it is or isn't, but if it is the case, what can be done to diffuse those kinds of tensions?
Well, you know, Paul, I want to take it to a larger, wider perspective, and that is talking about the whole story of the conflict and some narratives and concepts that relates to it. And in every single session that I have with audience, whether they are American Jews, global Jewry, policymakers, media, and so on, people ask me, what's the solution? And what about peace? And I want to say something about it. I've been saying that for many years, and up until now, I was very accurate. Don't talk about peace because it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. Not because I don't want peace, it's because the two people are not in a place where they could have peace. Rather, I'm saying once you are putting that away from the discussion and you are talking about what I call practical arrangements on the ground, referring also to the story that we saw, Jabal Mukaber and Talpiot Mizrach, this is the only baby step that you can take towards maybe building something that is better. And I think that it's very significant for us, if particularly right now, as we are talking about the story of the war, one of the things that I'm being asked is the story of the day after, in the context of Gaza. I'm taking it to a larger perspective. It's the same idea. We have to look at something that in the end of the day has to be built in a baby step. It has to be built in a frame of regional envelope. It has to involve larger players in the region in the end of the day. And it has to be some sort of like a scaffolding that you build upon those scaffoldings, layers upon layers, very slowly, very gradually, a process that builds the mutual trust that is very much needed for the next phase. And I think that this is the large, I would say, one of the major issues that we are reflecting in our work with audience around the world. Sometimes when I'm saying that to people, the first reaction is quite difficult because people say, whoa, what do you mean there is no peace? But then I'm saying, look at this as an opportunity, not as something that is blocking, but as something that is opening. If you push away this thing to the side, and now you say to yourself, okay, if this is not achievable, what is achievable? And things could be achievable if you are doing that gradually and the baby steps that I mentioned before. And one more note in that regards that I want to say. When I was doing that work in those rough years in Jerusalem, and you may remember that my first question was about the naivete. We shouldn't be naive. We shouldn't confuse between pragmatic needs and real reality and understanding what reality is made. So it will kind of like, will give us a better odds for success if we are not going to subscribe ourselves to the concept of naivete. We have to be very realistic when we are dealing with it.
Yeah, it's interesting when you say that the audiences, American audiences, will often react in that sort of like shocked way, because I think that one of the differences between whenever I speak to American Jews of whatever political affiliation, actually, and the difference between them and speaking to Israelis is that often for Americans living abroad, not Americans here, I should say, for those Americans here, but Americans living in America, that it's very, they look at it in this very sort of black and white way of like, either we make peace or we don't make peace. And I think people living here are more like, are by necessity have to think about the actual day-to-day reality. And I was struck by what the Mukhtar of Jabal Mukaber said to you when he said, I don't deal in big politics. I deal with, you know, can we get more kindergartens built and more schools built? And is that the key for you, the secret to sort of finding a way through this, the sort of dealing with the day-to-day issues, the achievable things?
This is definitely one level, one component, because in the end of the day, I'm going back to what I said. The Middle East reality shaping the reality of Israel and shapes the reality of what's going on in Jerusalem. Remember what I said in the concluding part. Sometimes with all the good intention, there are bigger players that are involved, and we see that quite often and unfortunately in a negative way. But at the same time, you could see that people like Tami and Tali and Mukhtar Mahmoud and others have the ability to make their small changes in their own environment. It is not going to end conflict. I said that very specifically. It's not going to resolve conflict, but it's going to create some different environment, different situation, different conditions that could be at least for the local communities, and now we are talking about Jerusalem, to find some way in the end of the day to live within a framework, within an envelope, which is enormously turbulent. And I think that this is something very significant. So I think that the most significant messages that I want to carry out is the understanding of the impact of the Middle East on the story of Israel, the understanding of the need of information and knowledge. You talked about it very accurately when you say there is this black and white perspective. It's not black and white. There are many, many subcolors. This is one of the major things that we are all the time emphasizing, and I can tell you right now, I just came back from the States for almost a month of many sessions and many briefings about the war. I was doing, and I'm doing that all the time also in Zoom. And there is one very clear thing that comes time and again, and this is the deep need of people in education, in knowledge, in understanding, something that brings to the picture the whole many pieces of the puzzle and create something that makes sense. This is what we are doing. This is what has to be done.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, let's get some questions from the audience. Milia, my colleague Milia is going to be at the side with a microphone for those that need. I see some people leaving now. If you leave now, firstly, you're going to miss some good questions, but also please do so with a minimum of interference in other people, and also grab a goodie bag as you leave. Everyone's going to get a goodie bag outside, so make sure you don't miss those that are in the lobby as you leave. Okay, yes, the gentleman here, yes, with the glasses.
Just one short note. A question is a short sentence that ends with a question mark.
That's even with all the words of wisdom that Avi said, that's possibly the most important thing he said in this evening. Yes, sir.
My name's Mike, and I do have a very specific question, but first the background. I live 50 meters from the seam line. Very interesting. I'm probably the only person ever to have physically walked the entire seam line through Jerusalem. It's about a 25-kilometer walk. Recommend it, but it's very hard. Sometimes you're going through bushes, sometimes you're going under freeways, sometimes you're going through people's backyards. Very interesting. Okay, but I wanted to follow up on one thing you said about citizenship. I spent some time in Beit Safafa talking to people there. In case you don't know, Beit Safafa is split. On one side of the railway, you're an Israeli citizen. On the other side, you're not. I appreciate what you said about they have the option of becoming Israeli citizens, but it doesn't make sense, it seems to me. Like, if Israel really says that Jerusalem is part of Israel, then why has it got two classes of citizenship? One, people born to Israeli citizenship, and one not. Would you not agree that, in fact, that it should be changed, and it would help, maybe that's a different question, that East Jerusalem, people born in East Jerusalem are necessarily, unconditionally given Israeli citizenship?
So just to clarify, you're saying that your question is whether people born in Jerusalem, Arab born, should automatically be given Israeli citizenship?
I know conditionally they are. I'm saying automatically.
I see.
This is part that goes back to what I said before when I was talking about the very unique situation of Jerusalemite Palestinians. To a large extent, it's a game that both sides are satisfied with. Israel offered the option for them to become fully citizens. Most of Jerusalemite Palestinians, for their own reasons, as I said before, prefer to stay in this legal status of permanent residence, because in the end of the day, there is a very small differences, roughly speaking, between that status and status as citizens. So it's a kind of like a game that both sides basically are playing it for their own interest.
Okay, yes. Let's take from Let's have, yes, Karen, let's get a lady before lest I be accused of only choosing men.
Hello, first of all, I'd like to say on.
Yeah.
Thank you very, very much. It's been a fantastic evening and incredibly interesting. My question obviously covers the situation we're in now. I look at this conversation between the Arab lady and the Israeli lady, and if it had been before October the 7th, my heart would have lifted. And I'm sure, like everybody here, I would have felt really hopeful and inspired. My question is this: these people are not the people. These people we fully believe want peace with us, and hopefully most of us want peace with them. That's not the problem. The problem is the extremists and how we can deal with extremism on both sides, and how and whether in these dark days you still are hopeful, and if so, how you see things moving forward.
Yes, thank you. Indeed, that's correct. I mean, we unfortunately live in a situation where you see extremists that are basically dictating their agenda. It is difficult times for many people, both Jews and Arabs as well, Israelis and Palestinians. And it's a long way. There is no shortcut. It has to do with many things like education, like politics, like economy and other things. But I do think that one of the things that we cannot allow ourselves is to lose hope. Because I think that when you see people that, you know, again, I'm going back to the small, quote unquote, example of small neighborhood in Jerusalem, Jabal Mukaber and East Talpiot. And you see that people in the end of the day, ordinary people, can make difference even in the small scale. This is something that I think is a source of strength and source of a hope. Yet again, to be realistic, not from a place of naivete, understanding the challenges that we are facing.
Okay, I'm going to take one from this side. The gentleman here, the beard. Yes, sir.
Thank you again for the wonderful lecture and thank you again for everything you did.
You didn't eat, huh?
Now, according to Islam, peace is the second treaty.
Can you speak closer to the microphone, sorry?
According to Islam, peace is the second treaty in importance. The lowest one is the Hudna al-Tahdiyah, the second one Salam, and the third one is the Sulh. So having said that, put peace aside, we have peace treaties with Jordan and Egypt. So how do you think we should relate to those treaties? As illusions, as something that can be lost in a second in the future?
Look, I mean, when you look at the whole historic experience of mankind, not only in the context of the Middle East, you find many situations where there used to be peace and then there was a war, and vice versa. There used to be a war and then there was a peace. We are not exceptional in that regard. I do believe, however, when I look specifically talking about Jordan and Egypt, for example, that I do think that we are looking at something that is lasting. I don't know to say to what extent, I don't know to say if it's going to be forever, but when I look at the conditions and the needs of the players involved, Egypt and Israel and Jordan, in the end of the day, I do identify that there is a long-term strategic need to keep that peace. And we should remember, we have peace with Egypt now for almost 50 years. We have peace with Jordan for 40 years, and there has been many, many challenges. In each and every one of those challenges, those peace agreement could easily collapse. I mean, right now, we see in the context of the war in Gaza, we see what happens in Egypt. We see what happened in Jordan. There is a lot of inner turbulence and bubbling of people that are basically calling for abolishing the agreements. But the agreements are there because they reflect, in the end of the day, at least for now, an understanding that those agreements serves long-term strategic interest. Is it forever? I don't know to say. Is it melt, you know, is it something that is in cement? I don't know to say. But this is what we can see today, at least for the feasible future.
Thank you. Gentleman there.
First of all, thank you for the very interesting and enlightening film. There is a question at the end of what I'm about to say, but I have to say it.
Please hold the microphone close so we can hear it.
Sure. So there is a question at the end, but I have to say what I'm about to say. The Mukhtar was complaining about 40% of the population getting 4% of the benefits. As far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, the Arabs in East Jerusalem in general do not pay taxes, as a result of which they do not get services. Double standards in the treatment of East and West Jerusalem by the municipality. If the Jews do something illegal, they get whacked on the head. Arabs very often get away with it and nothing happens. A wishful thinking on the part of the Jews, which has been proven by October the 7th events. We speak what we think. We engage in our actions out of the best of our intentions. I wish this were reciprocated on the other side.
What's the question, please?
I'm coming to it. I'm coming to it.
Okay, please.
Double speak. Again, David Lamb wrote a book called Arabs. Okay, you want the question? I'll give you the question.
Please, just because we're, sir,
Okay.
no disrespect, but we don't have much
Okay,
time and I want to
okay.
get other people's questions.
Okay, the Temple Mount. Why are the non-Muslims not allowed into the Al-Aqsa and the Dome of the Rock? I was told by one of the guides that it was a decision not by the Waqf, but by the Israeli government. Is this indeed so?
Look, to the best of my knowledge, non-Muslims are going to the Temple Mount compound. They are going through in a frame of regular visits or hours of visit. It has to be coordinated. I don't know to say whose fault is that, and that's the knowledge that I have. You may have a different knowledge, but this is the knowledge that I have. That's the knowledge that I have.
Oh, okay. Okay, this lady here. Yes.
I have a question about some of the citizens that you didn't mention here that are also not Jewish, the Druze and the Bedouins and the Christians that live here, and what role do you foresee them playing that could help in this forward-thinking peace process?
Well, these are different communities, and relatively they are less relevant in the context of the story of Jerusalem per se. I mean, the Druze community mostly lives in the northern part of Israel. We got the Druze in the Galilee who are Israeli citizens. We got the Druze in the Golan Heights who are permanent residents. The Bedouins also lives in the south or in the north. It's less relevant in the context of the story of Jerusalem. So these are less relevant communities.
Okay, yes. The front. Wait, can you wait for the mic, just so everyone can hear?
Thanks for a great presentation and beautiful filming. Hamas has called what they're doing the Al-Aqsa storm. What do you think of a potential Israeli response that includes a call for Jewish and Muslim prayer together for peace on Har Habayit?
I think that's a nice initiative. The only question that I ask is it going to be the Jewish Sephardic or Ashkenazi? Look, no, thank you for your question. Look, it goes back to what I said. Those are all wonderful things. Don't get me wrong. I really wholly support and identify with that. We need to be realistic in understanding the impact and what we want to achieve. But I welcome any kind of positive action that contributes even something small to make some small difference. In the end of the day, I'm a person that believes in these small changes that has been made on the ground, including something like that. I'm Sephardic, by the way.
Okay. Okay, there's a lady at the back. There's a lady here with a hand up very high. Yes. You with a tartan hat. Wait, can you wait for the mic?
I work with an Arab family from Beit Hanina, north part of Jerusalem. My question is, okay, and they do not consider them Arabs. My question is, are all Arab-speaking Muslims consider themselves, identify as Palestinians, and are all Arab-speaking Muslims considered Arabs?
I'll try.
They're not all Arabs and they're not all Palestinians. So
Yes.
I don't know how you distinguish.
Yeah. No. Thank you. I'll try to very shortly explain the because I understand it, because sometimes it's very confusing. Muslims are some 2 billion people are Muslims. So when we are talking about Muslims, we are talking about religion. Arabs is ethnicity. The Palestinians, most of the Palestinians in their ethnicity are Arabs, and most of the Palestinians in their religion are Muslims. However, most of the Muslims and most of the Arabs are not Palestinians. If it helps you to understand, if I was explaining it clear.
Okay, let's take some questions from higher up. There's a few questions here. The gentleman yes, sir, with the glasses. Just a second.
He doesn't need.
I guess you don't need, but.
Well, I'm being quite often interviewed to international Arab-speaking medias like Al Hurra, like, you're talking about Israel? Well, this is less about speaking to, it's about speaking with or talking with. I'm not lecturing to Palestinians. I have a lot of discussions with many people in the Arab world. This is what I'm doing professionally because I'm a Middle East expert, and this is what I'm doing. I have a lot of discussions with these people. I'm not lecturing at them. So I'm not sure what exactly are you interested to know.
Have
this kind of presentation in Arabic-speaking communities, and lack of better word, get away with it?
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, it's a reference to the point that some of the Arab women who were involved in the dialogue had to keep it secret from their families. Was that the reference?
That's what initiated it. In fact, it's a broader question of when the Arabic-speaking community cannot keep it a secret, maybe that's when things will advance more. But I was interested to hear your opinion. I didn't want to supply it.
Okay. Yeah, no, I'm sorry, I didn't understand it before. Look, I understand it, and I think that Tammy was saying that before. She said, look, in a way, it's a little bit disturbing because the Israeli side are coming openly to the discussion while the other side is basically concealing that. It is a given. It is a given situation. Is it the perfect one? I don't think so. I do think and hope that, you know, when two sides that have conflict come openly to the table and are talking, I think that's the preferable situation. It's not something that I can impose. And I think that Tammy was also referring to that very well in her explanation. She can never dictate, sort of speaking, to the other side, what's the level of exposure they're willing to conduct. It's a given situation. Is for itself, it may be disappointing, but it's not a reason not to do, not to be engaged in such a dialogue.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Lady, yeah, I can't quite see. Oh, yeah. Hi. Sure.
I believe it was the second film, you said that the Palestinians who were involved in violence were not only rebelling against Israel as an authority, but they were rebelling against the traditional Arab culture, the political structure in their own community as well. At least that was my understanding. And I'm curious what you think the catalyst was for the breakdown of respect on a neighborhood level of their own patriarchal authority structure.
Well, actually, what I said, that is one of the features of this intifada was, one of them was that they were rebelling also against the traditional leadership, but they were rebelling first and foremost against the Israeli occupation in their perspectives. And one aspect or one feature of their rebellion was also that they basically challenged the traditional leadership. There has been many ingredients that fuel that process. I was alluding to some of them before, and I reiterate. When we look at the story of the Intifada in Jerusalem, there are much bigger circles that in the end of the day, regional one. That's the reason I was emphasizing the whole thing of understanding the Middle East is critical if you want to understand the Israeli reality. Like, for example, the rise and strengthening of Islamization in the Arab world in the 60s and the 70s, the growing challenges in the Arab world and the collapse of Arab nationalism, Arab pan-nationalism, the growing economic challenges that were reflecting and radiating also on the Palestinians themselves. So there has been many different factors. Some of them were domestically, but the biggest one in the end of the day basically were those major aftershock waves that were radiated from the Arab world, from the region, and they basically shaped the change within the Palestinian young generation. I can tell you that early back day in the 80s, before my position here in Jerusalem, my position was in different parts of the West Bank. And in a very short period of time, and I've been to different places in the West Bank, Hebron and Ramallah and Kalkilia and Tulkar and places that are different one from the other, I could see how those aftershock waves are basically reaching to this shore and generating this beginning of change, resulting in 87, the outbreak of this intifada. It's always about these large factors that in the end of the day generates those wheels.
Okay, right. We have a lot of questions, a lot of hands up, and unfortunately not enough time to get through all of them, but let's see what we can do. The gentleman here with the glasses, yes.
My first time learning about you. Wow. Back and see your article. Two questions. Can you tell us briefly your October 7th experience from what it was like for you to hear and learn about a series of events? And can you explain to the best of your ability how Israel failed so badly in our response? I'm curious what you would say.
Yes, as you could understand, each one of those questions takes a seminar as an introduction. But I'll refer to the first question because it's interesting. Early morning, Saturday, October 7th, Maya went to the synagogue. I was still sleeping. She came home and she woke me up and she said something happening in the south. About an hour later, I started a marathon of interviews. I got, phone calls from CNN and Sky News and I-24, and since then I've been kind of like engaged in this almost endless marathon of interviews and briefings, providing to different audiences, to the point, at some point, it became like a roller coaster. And I think it was 10 days into the war. I had a very unique and exceptional interview, and amazingly, with the BBC. The BBC, that was a very interesting interview because the reporter, she took the conversation to something that was very interesting. She basically said, look, I heard you, I read your stuff, but she said, I want to talk to you about yourself on October 7th, like what you asked right now. And I said, you know, something interesting happened to me on October 7th. Shortly after it started, I made a deliberate inner decision to cut myself from the social media. I totally cut myself from the social media, deliberately. And what I was trying to do was to focus as much as possible to stay cold. Because I understood that if I won't be able to stay cold, I won't be able to refer to the situation in a way that could offer people some understanding. And this is my job. And
you mean if you get too emotionally?
If I would get too emotionally, and you know, it's interesting because in the hundreds of briefings that I was doing since both through Zoom as well as in person in the States, many times people told me that attitude helped them because it's kind of like leaving the emotions on the side. And for me, that was definitely a shelter. That was something that was providing me the shelter from dealing with that. I watched the terrible documentation of what happened in October 7th. And it was very clear to me that I must continue and try to do this block between what I feel and the emotions and between the ability to provide the analysis, to answer people's questions and to provide them. So in a way, the fact that we, myself and Maya, in our work as educational, mission, we kind of like focused on that, helped us to navigate this critical phase. I think I'll keep it to myself.
Okay. Okay. Right, let's have one last, we're going to have one last question. Yes, in the front there, yes. I'm sorry, everyone else. Everyone had questions that didn't get asked at the end. I'm sure you can approach Avi at the end and
maybe we should do replay, but then
right,
you have to bring
exactly.
the food. I'll bring the wine.
Ask another question, but now that I'm looking at the screen again, and you're standing on King Hussein's unfinished palace, why has it never been developed? I mean, there's so much building going on in Jerusalem. How come that's been left alone?
Up until not so long ago, this was the property of the Hashemite kingdom. It was the property of the king. So here is an answer why wasn't it developed. I personally would like to live there. It's a great place. You don't need air conditioning. You get a great view. It's a perfect place to live.
Okay, I want to thank Avi Melamed very much, and everyone else, involved in making the film. Thank you all for coming. I want to remind you, firstly, there are goodie bags outside. Please make sure you take one before you go home, courtesy of Avi and his team. Here at the Begin Center, we have some other live events in 2 weeks' time. We have something talking about the U.S.-Israel relationship and anti-Semitism. We're going to have conversations via Zoom with Dennis Ross and Elliot Abrams, amongst others. And we also have a book launch in a few weeks' time. So keep keep up to date through our website. And if you're not on my mailing list, you can email me, paulg@begincenter.org.il. Thank you very much. Good evening. Bye.